Aronian versus MVL. So, I believe this came out of some sort of anti-Grunfeld, which both players are very familiar with these things. We have an opposite sides castling situation where white is throwing the h-pawn and black is also trying to throw things at the white king. Here white played h5. Bishop g5 is played to get out of the way of the rook on h1. Knight c5 bringing in another piece, and a5, a normal move, trying to keep attacking on the queen side as well. But after h takes g6, there's not really a fantastic way to capture. If f takes, knight e6 happens because we vacated that square, and white is just winning at this point because it's a fork on the doveswood bishop and rook. Bishop e7 will have to be played, and something like f4, bring the rook into h3, and that is lights out. So, if h takes, however, still we have this very cool, interesting move, f4, sacrificing a pawn, but it doesn't really matter because the point is to bring in the d rook to h3 and infiltrate on the king side. So, black actually plays queen takes g6, which is the best move, but after f4, with the same idea as before to bring in the rook to h3, there's not a lot to be done here for black. E takes f4, rook h3, and this brilliant move f3 is played. It's kind of the only way to play on in the position. So the threat is obviously on the knight, and on g2, knight d4 is forced, plus he really want this f5 square for the knight. But after knight d2, which is a very good try, king a1, f takes g, there's only really one good move here for white, and it was missed. So white should play the move rook to d1, and the reason is if you play the very natural rook g1 move, bishop f1 not only defends the pawn, locks the rook into a little prison for a long time, it closes down the g-file. So all of a sudden, black is doing totally fine and is maybe going to be better at some point. So this actually happened in the game. Levon played the move rook g1, which is natural. Bishop e3, takes, knight c4, and we end up taking on g2 twice, and you might be thinking white is winning here, but because of my g4 breaking this pin, black is still doing just fine. The move knight e7 is played attacking the rook and threatening the move rook g4. Queen takes g4 would be met by knight f6 check with a fork on the king and the queen. So it looks pretty good here. Black actually missed a devastating win in this position. Knight e3, a fork on the queen and the rook, hanging my queen. But if rook takes g6, this comes with check, mind you. But after f takes g6, white doesn't have time to take on f8, because I take on c2 with check. I recapture, and I'm just up a clean exchange. But if I don't take, and I move the queen anywhere, the difference now is that the f-file is open, and there are back rank threats. So black would just be completely winning here. This was missed due to time issues. Black just played the natural move h5, just supporting the knight. White picks up the exchange. Knight f5 finally, threatening knight e7, rook e8 forced. Rook g1, just kind of guarding the back rank. If not rook g1 and I am too hasty and I move my queen somewhere, then black would actually have queen takes f5, using this pin against the back rank to pick up a piece and win the game. So rook g1, king h7, rook c1, knight f6, takes, and knight e7 is another point where things are starting to get very loose. All of a sudden, black's pieces are seemingly very well coordinated, while white's pieces are getting very, very clumsy, mostly due to the back rank issues. So, queen g5, very, very good move. I like the shapes involved with this move, the geometry of it all. Really overworking the queen, and making it difficult to move pieces. So queen c2 is played, and after a queen e5, there's not really anything that white can do, because after a knight c8, queen takes d5. I'm up 2 pawns. This pin doesn't mean a whole lot, because even if I had left my queen here, and I get out of the pin, there's still issues with the queen on c2 having to stay guarding the rook on c1. So this all liquidated down into just an endgame where black is up a pawn, but not only that, up a pawn, up a past each pawn, and he has a past f pawn. So this is just a losing battle. However, Aronian is still fighting, tries to get his own counterplay, his own pass pawn, but unfortunately, it was able to be stopped by trading the knights and playing the move rook b2. I think there was not a resignation here, but there could have been, because now there's just too many pawns, and white is lost. So I think here we had a resignation. Okay, moving on to Fabi versus Vidit. Fabi had the white pieces here. I'm not going to go through the whole game here. I just wanted to show this one point. So black is under pressure this whole game, and white is breaking through on the e-file here. The move bishop h3 is coming. Black made a mistake with the move king f8, just allowing bishop h3. And after knight g7, rook takes d4, queen a3. Fabi actually blundered in this position. He played the move rook d7. You might be wondering, okay, so I win the queen. It's not that simple. Fabi obviously saw this. White is getting many pieces for the queen here, because after knight e8, I have bishop d7. And we're building up on this pin. After knight e1, black has the move, which was missed by both Vidit and Fabi, queen d6. And now bishop takes e8 doesn't work because of queen takes. And if rook takes, I simply play king f7, and the bishop and the rook are just a little bit too clumsy, and this would be kind of an equal position here after something like bishop takes c6, queen takes c6, and say rook b8, kind of my only square. Black is still certainly, well, I was going to say, white is still doing okay, but the coordination, lack of coordination might be too much here. But instead, Vidit played queen a7, missing that, and the position after this sort of just plays itself. You bring the knight into the game, push the d-pawn. Almost every square is controlled by white, and it's just a little bit too much for a single black queen to handle. So the game progressed, and black ended up resigning here because of the massive material advantage and weak king, etc. So next we'll look at Wesley So versus Gukesh. So I wanted to start at this point in the game. It's around equal. I think that the position is not clear to me exactly who's going to be better. I could see black being better because of this bishop, but black's pawn structure is also maybe significantly worse. E6 is played, just gaining space and control over these light squares in 7th rank, potentially opening up this square for my queen. Takes, and then in this position, black should really play the move c5 or something, and force me to capture on d8, and then at least black has control over this d-file. I assume that's the point. Oops. But instead, black actually played rook takes d4. And after queen takes d4, now the queen is just extremely active, with little to no compensation for it. So queen d7, obviously can't take because the king is nowhere near the square. Queen d6, queen e8, check, picking up a pawn. The king is actually very safe from checks after g3. And at this point, black is just praying. Queen takes h6, picking up lots of pawns. Check, king h7, but after king h7, now queen h4 is a check that's available that wouldn't be there if king f8. Or, you know, my point is getting to the 4th rank, so that knight c4 is finally a possibility. So that's just seemingly a blunder, but I think he had, 12 seconds left here, so Wesley So did win the game, I think by resignation. And finally, this game was not decisive, this was a draw, but you would not believe it if we just looked at the game. So, starting out with some sort of Moscow type bishop b5 check, Sicilian. A normal position is reached, okay? And now g4, and we're going to have another opposite sides castling event where white throws the h and g and f pawns at the black king. After castles, g5 is played, knight d7, h4. Knight c5. Black has to start counterplay of his own. He's threatening knight b3. This is a very strong bishop on d4, but you kind of have to give it up for this knight on c5 because it's just too strong. After d takes c, f5, b5. If takes, by the way, the computer wants to play the move g6 here, which is pretty straightforward. We just want to open files towards the king. F takes is illegal. And if h takes, I assume just h5. Yeah, h5. And these open files are too much. So, instead b5 starting counterplay. f6, bishop d8, takes on g7, king takes on g7. So white actually had the chance, in some positions, to think about taking on e6, sacrificing a bishop, playing queen g4, and playing on these light squares, because black's pieces are just all sort of loose and disorganized, and it's a very interesting try. Say, f takes g7, king takes g7, bishop e6, f takes, queen g4. Or even better would probably be to not take on g7 and only play bishop e6 now, because queen g4, now queen e6 is coming with a threat of check. This could be one possibility, but it's very messy. Instead, white took on g7, played queen h5, very natural move. But after c4, queen h6 check, king g8, h5, just sacrificing a bishop anyway, there's a very, very strong idea here, either playing queen c7 or bishop c7. The idea being there's a threat of bishop f4 check, just kind of trapping the queen, because the g-pawn won't be able to move anymore. So black plays queen c7. And now, after g6, we're covering the f4 square. However, f takes g6 suddenly opens this up for possible queen trades. H takes g6, queen f4 check, forcing the queens off. And after takes on h7, king h8, defending a bishop, bishop e2, b4, the position is suddenly just not as good as it seemed like it was going to be. A little bit disappointing. Takes on c4. Firouzja defended very well with no time. And it ended up being kind of an interesting endgame where black is up a piece but is going to lose all of his pawns, which is usually just going to be a draw. And in the game it was. However, I want to take us to another point where white could have played for a win, actually. In this position, white played king c4, which ruins the advantage. White is actually winning here. You would think that the move king d4 makes a lot of sense to stop bishop from coming into e3 and blockading the pawns on the dark squares. However, if you play king d4 too quickly, bishop d2, and it's the same thing, just to move back. So instead we play a5 first, after king f7, now we play king d4. And now this move bishop d2 just doesn't do anything, because I just play a6. So in this position, if black tries bishop g3 to get behind anyway, now the point is that white is actually shouldering the black king after king e7, a6, bishop f2, king c6, and now king b7. And then the plan is pretty simple. I just put my pawn on b6, block the bishop, and then play a7, a8 equals queen. This was actually a miss for a win by Jan, even though he was down a piece. Instead, the game did end in a draw. So, moving on to round two. We only had 2 decisive games. Levon Aronian actually won versus Vidit. We'll look at that game first. So, Aronian chose a French defense. The knight ended up being traded for the bishop on e3, and now we have a pawn structure where the pawn e3 is just sorted backwards, weak, and if it's able to be won, then the rest of the pawns kind of become weak. So g6, bishop d3, bishop h6, targeting that e3 pawn. We need 2. And then Levon plays this very interesting f6 pawn sacrifice. Quite an exciting move. If you don't take, then I'm just breaking everything apart and kind of winning. So taking is forced. And after that, black simply castles. And now it's quite dangerous already. b5 is played, and instead of moving the knight, instead, of course, we just move another pawn in the center, threatening d4. After e5, again, there's not really anything great to do aside from taking. e4, bishop takes e4. This is considered a mistake. Better would be knight e5, but just barely. After knight e5, queen b3, bishop b takes b7, bishop takes b7, knight g4, actually defending e3 and threatening the bishop on g5. This seems like it should be pretty good for white, but after knight d2, queen e6, it's all sort of hanging together. Queen c4 was played. Better would be like queen b5, and hanging the knight, but queen takes b7 with the threat of checkmate on g7, so there's no time to take on e3 or g2. Instead, queen c4 was played, which also prevents queen takes g4, but bishop d5 is pretty annoying, and in fact would be played after queen b5 as well, except now white has to move the queen a second time. Queen c7 is played, again threatening mate on g7, bishop h4, g3, bishop f6 takes, and rook b1 is a blunder. Instead, better would be queen e5, and kind of centralizing the queen, not allowing rook c8 with the tempo. But after rook b1, queen a3, queen a6 is a strong move. Better would have been rook c8. And the king is still stuck in the center here. With very, very little activity. It's looking very bad for white. Aronian plays queen a6, which is kind of a similar idea, just really trying to make it felt how in the center and stuck the king is. In c5, bishop e6, a very subtle threat. And after d5, black just plays rook c8, followed by bishop g4, and there's no way to stop mate on e2. So white just resigned, which is fair in this position. I'd like to start in this position after bishop c5. Trading seems like a reasonable thing to do because you get to play b4 and you're trying to sort of disconnect all these pawns and make them weak and overextended. And if a takes b, then queen takes, and this is seemingly pretty good for black. However, knight d5 is played instead, threatening to take the pawn here. and just sort of centralizing the pieces. Taking on d5 looks pretty terrible because these pawns are so strong. So bishop b5 seems like maybe a miss for the exchange, but no, this is the plan where he's actually sacrificing the exchange for sort of an attack, but also sort of positional. So knight takes f6, doubling the pawns, queen e3, threatening to come in on these dark squares. The idea would be knight h4, knight f5, things like this. Bishop takes f1, makes sense. If you don't believe in the attack, you should take the exchange. King h8, knight h4, rook g8, and queen f3, targeting this f6 pawn. Queen d8, defending it, a natural move, but now a takes b4 can't be met by queen takes b4, and now it's looking more like a positional sacrifice, because in the endgame this is going to actually be fine for white, due to these strong pawns and all the holes in the position that the knight can use to jump around, and there's also a lack of open files for the rooks if the knight lands on d5. So rook b8, rook d1, taking the only open file with a tempo, queen e7, another tempo move bringing the knight into f5, queen b7, knight e3, trying to reroute the knight to the best square, d5, which would be targeting weaknesses, and just be in the center and defending b4. Rook g6, knight d5, a5, trying to, again, break the pawns apart. Rook c1 is played, trying to support this passed c-pawn. After it, rook c8, h4, trying to make this rook look a little bit silly. If rook h6, then it can become very clumsy very quickly. So takes on b4, h5, rook h6, but now queen f5. Computer thought queen e3 made sense, and this is actually what I thought was going to be played. It does hang the h-pawn, but after rook takes h5, knight takes f6. I mean, I don't know what's going on, but this was certainly my first instinct. But queen f5 is probably better. Don't listen to the computer. Rook c6, over-defending, blockading. Knight e3, queen c8, trying to get these queens off, but white plays this, well, I think devastating move, g4, just entombing the rook for the rest of time. And solidifying this pawn on h5, bring in the king, try to eliminate this passed c-pawn, but it's already kind of too late because of how terrible this rook on h6 is. And there's no real way to actually get in and give any checks because this knight on e3 is such a good defender as well. So f5, queen d8, king e2, a marvelous move, just stepping out of the pen and threatening knight f5. There is just no way for black to get counterplay at this point. If you try to check me, then I just go king d2, and there's just no more checks. Knight f5 seems unstoppable. So rook f6 is tried, but there was something else in mind here. h6, king g6, queen g8 takes. This is all forced, and g5 winning the rook, and black resigns. In the last round, there was one decisive result, Levon Saric versus Vidit, and it was kind of a very strange-looking opening, in my opinion. c4 here, e6, bishop g2, and then knight b4, just threatening knight c2. But white says that this is not really a problem in just castles. After bishop e7, knight c3, knight c2, yes, the rook is threatened, but the issue is after c takes d, e takes d, e4. This bishop is no longer defending the knight, and if you take the knight, if you take the rook on a1 with the knight, I just take your bishop, and this knight is still trapped. So this is, we all know that two pieces is better than a rook, most of the time. But if you don't take, if you play something like d takes e, queen takes c2, the pawn is pinned. And no, white didn't win material technically, but after rook e1, the king is very, very much still in the center, while white has several pieces out. Development is fast, the rooks are coming into the center, and one small step in the wrong direction and black can resign. And this is exactly what happened. Queen d7, normal, We don't want to trade the queens when black's king is stuck in the center. Threaten queen takes b7, but mainly just avoiding queen trade. And after c6, c6 is actually just a blunder, because it creates a very weak hook for white to attack with d5 and open the center. And better would be to just give that pawn up, play knight f6, try and castle, get your pieces out, because at this point, the lead in development and king safety is just too much. So d5 is played, rook b8, bishop g5, attacking this pinned piece, but mainly threatening to bring the rook into d1. King f8, takes on c6, queen takes, and if you take my queen, I checkmate you, by the way, in case you were wondering. So, we move the rook, queen f4, f6, creating more weaknesses. This rook is still not in the game. This knight is pinned. Well, this is just a dream position for white, but still fighting is happening. a5 just sacking a pawn to get that knight out of the pin. King f7, knight e4, b6. Now the queen comes in the other side, inducing more weaknesses on the dark squares. Queen f3, now f6 is a target. And knight e5. This is not a real tactic. Rook takes d5, queen takes knight b5, or knight g5, because you just take it, in case you were wondering. But again, just pin the knight again, and build up on that pin. I think we've won. Technically we're not up a pawn, but this g-pawn's not going to be held on to forever. So, we just win our pawn back, trade everything, and in a very nice way too, by the way, taking the time to bring in the king first while the rook is still pinned before trading everything. And then this endgame was just winning for white, due to the fact that they are down a pawn. They can't really leave this area of the board because pass pawn can be created, and now we just have opposition, we shoulder the king, and win this. Black resigned here.
Thank you for watching the video. Don't forget to give us a like and subscribe.